Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Cloud versus On-Premise, Learn What's Right for Your Organization. I would like to pass the baton over to Mr. John Bennet, who's going to be our moderator today. John, take it away.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I am John Bennet, the HPE Storage Specialist for the SMB and Sled Space for Kentucky with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We've got a couple good guests with us here today. Our goal with the cloud versus on-prem is to have a conversation, and please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'd love to make sure we get to all those questions. If we aren't able to do so during the presentation, we'll make sure to reach back out and get you the questions, the answers to your questions. But before we get into the presentation, I'd like to make introductions here. Mr. Shane Wendel from NetGain Technology. Shane, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hey guys, again, Shane Wendel. I'm a consulting system engineer with NetGain Technologies. We're a managed service provider based in Lexington, Kentucky. We're an HPE, VMware, and Microsoft partner, among others, serving primarily the small to medium business space. And my role is to help our clients determine and implement the best solution to meet their business objectives, whether that's on-premise solutions such as a VMware or Hyper-V cluster built on traditional infrastructure, or a public cloud solution such as Microsoft Azure or Microsoft 365.
Thank you, Shane. And I've got another HPE resource. I like to call him the channel guru. He kind of knows everything about everything, and he helps our channel partners do what they do. Mr. Eric Powers. Eric, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. I don't know about that. The channel grew maybe a little bit too much there, but like John said, my name is Eric Powers, no relation to Austin Powers whatsoever. I work with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Of course, you all are probably familiar with us, a leader in the data center computing and storage space, as well as just being able to help deliver our customers private and hybrid cloud environments, which we're really excited to talk about here today. My role is a channel technical architect within Hewlett Packard Enterprise, which means my role is to help our channel partners like NetGain, as well as you all, our customers, develop the strategies necessary to deliver on private, public, and hybrid cloud. So happy to be here. Thanks, John, for having us.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Before we get going, we wanted to get a feel for the audience, and Megan's going to put up a polling question here. If you can take a moment to answer this, we're going to kind of set the tone to see who we're talking to today and where everybody is as it pertains to leveraging cloud services. And while we're taking a moment to do that, little fact of information: cloud data centers will process 94% of workloads in 2021. That came from a pretty credible source. That's amazing to me. 94% of workloads will be done in data centers, and cloud data centers rather. So it continues to grow. I'd like to see where that number was 10 years ago to see where it is today. All right, Megan, how'd that turn out? So 73% of people are leveraging cloud services today. Is that what you would have guessed, Eric and Shane?
Yeah, I think so. I think when you throw in software as a service solutions in there, everyone is very likely to be using some form of cloud.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Go ahead. You agree, Eric?
Yeah, I said I would 100% agree with that statement. You know, depending on what they define as cloud too, because cloud to different customers is different things, which I know we're going to talk about today. So I'm really excited to see that poll and see those results as well. It's really consistent with what we see.
Good segue, good segue. What we're going to do right now is kind of define what cloud is. And forgive me for, I believe we got IT leaders on this call as well as some financial leaders. And if you already know the answers to this question, forgive us, but we want to make sure everybody understands exactly what we're talking about here. So Eric, help me understand, what is a private cloud?
Yeah, so private cloud to a lot of people is different things, but I think we have to take a step back and understand first what is cloud in general. We define here at HPE, and even personally speaking, cloud is an experience, not a destination. That's the first step, built on basically three premises. Number one, a consumption-based financing experience where you only pay for what you use. The ability to have a single common management plane across all of your resources, whether that be your resources in your private cloud or your public cloud, or between the two. And then finally, the speed and elasticity necessary to deploy resources fast and quickly and efficiently to the overall business. And when we look at private cloud, we take those concepts and we bring them to a customer's own individual environment, whether that be on-premise, in a co-location. What's the difference we see in private cloud is that these resources are dedicated to a single organization and a single user rather than multiple users and multiple organizations.
Understood. And to contrast that, you have the public cloud. Shane, can you speak a little bit about what the public cloud is?
Yeah, I think expanding on Eric's experience definition, the main difference is you take that experience and move it to a public provider of the service. So basically, to put it more simply, it's when those computing resources, services, and applications are being run by an external organization.
Mm-hmm.
So many of the same service and applications just being run by someone else, typically a large provider like Microsoft Azure, Amazon, or Google.
Kind of a multi-tenant fashion, oversubscription, and kind of get what you pay for in a sense, right? Lastly, there's the Sas model, and Shane touched on this a moment ago when we had our polling results. A lot of applications today are delivered as a service. For example, Office 365. I'm sure there's several organizations watching today that leverage 365 for their email. Well, that's an application that used to be on site in Exchange, right? And Microsoft said, hey, we can do that for you. How many users do you have? I've got 15, 20. Okay, it's going to be $30 a month per user, and you don't have to manage that environment anymore. Okay, great, sign me up. So that SaaS model is continuing to become more and more common with the various applications out there. You've got, just SAP as a service, Epic as a service. A lot of these various applications are providing that, and because the users want it, and it may be for a multitude of reasons. One of them might be financial. I may not have the funds available to go out and purchase that application on my own, but I can pay for 10 users. That would be extremely helpful to my organization. So to circle back, we've got private cloud, public cloud, and SaaS offerings. So thank you, guys. Hey, Megan, that next polling question, we're going to talk a little bit about, this kind of goes in line with private versus public. The cost question. This is the last polling question, folks, I promise, but it helps us understand who we're speaking with, and we can speak to that. And while we're waiting on that, did you know the average business runs 38% of workloads in public and 41% in private cloud? 38% in public, 41% in private. I think these statistics are pretty insightful. Granted, statistics may, who knows exactly where all the data comes from, but those smart people do what they do, and they give us things to chew on, the Gartners of the world, the Forbes of the world, but that's what we leverage to share this data. And we're coming up on the results. All right, this is interesting. Okay, wonderful. So 58% have determined or think on-premise is more expensive than the cloud, therefore meaning the cloud is less expensive. So this is great insight, folks. Megan, thanks for putting that polling question up there and showing the results. So Eric gave us the definition of private cloud. Shane gave us the definition of public cloud. At the end of the day, private, whether you're going to a doctor or a practice, if you've got that dedicated private doctor, guess what? They're going to be more expensive. If you're going to a group of doctors, maybe not so much, but expensive because you have dedicated resources. Public cloud is in a multi-tenant fashion that is oversubscribed, and it's going to be less costly. There's a misnomer out there that I know it's been around for quite some time. Cloud is less expensive. Cloud is cheaper. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is the one time in an IT professional's life that they have to take off their technology hat and put on their finance hat, and really look at it from a different point of view. The good thing is it's never been easier in a lot of ways to find out what cost will be like between keeping things on premise in a private cloud and moving things to the public cloud, because you can go find everything on the internet. The problem with that, though, is you have to think about things beyond just the initial, for example, cost of storage in the public cloud or on-premise. You need to consider things like the cost of having a data center and having the heating and cooling aspect. When you talk about the public cloud, you need to think about things like egress fees. I know we've made this reference before in the past, John, in talking about the Hotel California example when we talk about the public cloud. It's great to go in, but it's really hard to go out. I mean, if you look at the principles of the public cloud, it's free to send all your data there, but to take any of it out is extremely expensive. In fact, I have one customer right now, a very large organization, who put 15 petabytes over the last 10 years within the public storage cloud providers. And what they found out was that their bill that was really small to begin with, it became $5 million plus a month, and it was becoming extremely unsustainable. And so what they're looking at doing now is leveraging both the private cloud on-premise and that public cloud environment and move some stuff back on-prem. But what they found out is that the cost associated with bringing it back on-prem almost makes it impossible, but it also makes it almost infeasible by the amount of time it takes to get your data out of that multi-tenant environment. In fact, that customer specifically is expected to take 15 years to get most of that data that they want to get back on-prem back to within their private cloud, because make no bones about it, public clouds are not in the game of wanting to rush to get your data out. They want to bring it in as quick as possible. So just some things to think about beyond just the initial, the cost estimates.
I want to follow up on that, but Shane, I'd like to get your 2 cents when you're talking with your clients and helping them traverse these cloud waters. What are you seeing? Is the expense a thought out of the gate, or do they focus on the simplicity? Hey, I can spin up a credit card and go. Do they think long term as to what this will look like 2-3 years down the road? What are you seeing with the clients you're helping?
Yeah, I think the answer is always it depends whether it's cheaper or not. And a lot of it that I find in the small to medium business space is with the size of the clusters and the size of the client's environment and what those applications are doing. So one of the factors that you have to really consider when you're talking about moving things to the public cloud is networking. So yes, while you may be able to save quite a bit of money on storage, servers, maybe even licensing, maybe personnel to manage those things, now you're typically having to invest a significantly more in networking infrastructure to make sure you can reach those public cloud resources in a resilient and acceptable way to the client. So you're not ruining the client experience by having having those services going over a much lower bandwidth, higher latency connection. So you really, as you mentioned earlier, have to factor in all of those things in making your decision about which one is actually cheaper.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Shane.
No, I was done.
Good deals. Prior to becoming the storage specialist for Kentucky several years ago, I spent a significant amount of time working for a data center cloud provider in the Kentucky region. And one of the questions, people would come to us often and, hey, what does it look like to go to the cloud? I read this article in a magazine, and my CFO or my CIO has tasked me with putting this together as far as what does that look like to move to the cloud. And more times than not, 99 times out of 100, it was always more expensive. Because if you're comparing hardware to the cloud is always going to be more expensive. However, if you take all the other factors into consideration, as Eric and Shane had mentioned, power, cooling, bandwidth cost, employee management cost, the FTEs you have to get to maintain and operate that. If you're taking in all those variables into consideration, that's where the cloud makes a good case versus an on-premise solution. And at the end of the day, if you could extrapolate it out 3, 4, 5 years, that's what I would recommend to do as an exercise to understand the ROI for that particular project. Well, guys, thanks so much for that. We've got multiple clouds out there and multiple options. From a data mobility perspective, 5 years ago, if you went to the cloud, you were putting your eggs in one cloud basket and going from there. Shane, I'll throw this one to you. From a data mobility perspective, and Eric, I want to get your thoughts as well. Are you seeing clients leveraging just one cloud provider or a mix of things? How are they doing this today?
Yeah, on my side in the small to medium business space, typically yes, but it's also service dependent. So they, for instance, we talked about software as a service. I think that's the largest area of adoption is the software as a service space, particularly Microsoft 365, as we mentioned. And so you may have customers who are using Microsoft 365 for software as a service, email, collaboration, such as Microsoft Teams, things like that, but then using a different cloud provider for something like disaster recovery and backup, which I always call the gateway drug. Disaster recovery as a service to a cloud provider is one of the ways that people end up doing a migration of their infrastructure to the cloud. They'll do their disaster recovery test, find that everything works just fine in the cloud provider, and then decide, hey, we're not going to do that hardware refresh the next time it comes around.
I couldn't agree more. I think that DR as a service is the gateway drug to the cloud, and checks so many boxes, brings a lot of value. And but keep going. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you.
That was it. I'll hand it over to Eric.
Cool.
No, I
Eric,
would.
what are your thoughts on data mobility in regards to the cloud?
Yeah, I would say it was interesting. Let's just say about 10, 15 years ago now, which seems like just yesterday in a lot of ways. We saw in the public cloud out this huge, massive shift to the public cloud, especially organizations, let's just say startup organizations or small, medium businesses that said, hey, I don't have the resources able to make this happen, have the infrastructure there, because it's not just about accruing hardware and having it on-prem and having the applications running. It's going and doing the daily management, keeping everything up to date, making sure the lights stay on, and then ultimately having to even react to the end users within the organization to make sure everything is operating the way it should. So what we saw was a lot of people moving that shift to the public cloud. And then what we found was when a lot of people went to the public cloud, they realized that, hey, this is not meant for every application. It's really an application type of discussion and the data associated with that application. For example, there's a lot of compliance and security reasons with healthcare organizations, for example, with HIPAA, as well as different regulations and government policies regarding like the financial industry that make it really hard for certain applications to move to the public cloud. And so what we saw within about the last 6-7 years is that shift now not back on-prem, is a shift to the middle and say, hey, let's do a mix of the two, because that's where we can get the best cost benefit and the best benefit from a mobility standpoint of our data overall. And so that's what we're seeing. It's really the shift towards that middle part. And if we bought into this many years ago and believing, hey, the public cloud is not the end all be all, but neither is the on-premise. And it needs to be a combination of the two. And you see that today with even the public cloud vendors, with Azure Stack, for example, from Azure, Amazon with their new Outpost offerings, and even Google with Google Cloud Anthos. Everyone's buying into this process of, hey, it's not going to be one or the other. We need a combination of the two to make this an application-dependent conversation. For example, things like backup, great moving to the cloud, great first movers, and DR, just like Shane said, but maybe not those mission-critical apps that we need to have, the best latency and the best results for.
Very good insight there. You talk about data mobility, leveraging multiple cloud providers. We're seeing a lot more of that happening, where organizations are drilling down per application and looking at the financial implications of what cloud makes the most sense for that particular application and the uptime required for that application. If I've got my mission critical application that cannot go down, it may make sense to spend a little bit extra to get a few more nines of uptime. But with that, you're going to pay a little bit more, right? The more nines equals more dollar signs, I guess you might say. But then there's that 10-year-old backup data that you need to have because of compliance, but it hasn't been accessed in years. And it may make sense to throw that into a blob type storage to where you can get a whole lot for not very much. So I think if organizations go through the process of reconciling the applications and understanding what provider may make the most sense, it could be an opportunity for them to save a tremendous amount of money on an annual basis. That's all good stuff. Well, Shane, you touched on the DR as a service piece, being the gateway to cloud. With that, I've got a lot of experience in that space myself. One of the drivers I wanted to share for that is the RTO and RPO, the recovery time objective and recovery point objective. if you're an organization that happens to have a production environment and someone says to you, what's your DR plan? What happens if this building is no longer here? A lot of businesses don't have a DR plan. So having an ability to focus on a VM, a virtual machine, and for those not in the IT area, more so on the financial side, a VM is one of many virtual machines in one server. So if I had an ability to take that VM and send it to a DR as a service provider and pay a monthly fee so that application, that data is accessible in the event my building goes away, what a tremendous value than having to stand up another environment entirely and go through that process, that run book of getting that application back online so your business can function and continue to generate revenue. So I would encourage anyone that does have a single production environment today, explore DR as a service. And there's a lot of different options out there. I know Shane can help out and Eric can help out. That's definitely something I'd put, step number one, get that DR plan. And a lot of times they'll help you create that run book for you and give you opportunities to say, hey, my recovery point is within seconds, or hey, that data is going to be an hour old at worst. And that recovery time, hey, it's going to take you 4 hours once you declare a disaster to be operational. And once again, the shorter that time frame, the more expensive it gets. If you can afford to be down a day, that becomes a little more palatable. It all depends on your organization. So I wanted to make sure we touched on those financial pieces. Guys, what do you think the main driver for organizations going to the cloud is? Eric?
Yes, I think the biggest driver for organizations is cost. I mean, everything goes down to cost, but I think you have to take that, like you said, in consideration with the application specifically, and really the use case. Number one, first movers are for the best offering that we see customers moving to the public cloud for most of the time is cheap and deep storage, which is really on the backup and the archives perspective. That tends to be some of those first movers and that we see the most of. However, what we see a lot of the time as well is that we see organizations that have different departments with different cloud vendors with different strategies, and it's really all disparate. And so that's where it's incumbent upon all of us, including NetGain and HPE, to have a conversation and bring together those different organizations to make sure we have a discussion around what's the right fit to move to public cloud, stay within your private cloud, or a combination of the two, to make sure that we get the best, the best cost, the best bang for the buck, but then also just make sure that we keep up with compliance, keep up with legal concerns, keep up with security, and make sure the whole organization's on the same page, and make sure we're not wasting any funds along the way.
Shane, why don't organizations move to the cloud in your experiences? When you've got organizations that are thinking about it, what are some reasons they don't go to the cloud?
Trust is one. We have in the small to medium business space, particularly, we have CFOs, CIOs, CEOs that don't trust someone else having their data. Networking concerns again is a big one. We have clients who are in an area of the state where they don't have good access to reliable and fast internet connections. Also a big one is legacy applications that require low latency. So we have manufacturing clients who are doing real-time production systems, and they can't have 30 to 40 millisecond latency even as all these different PLC machines are talking to each other and talking back to servers and reporting. So I think those are some big ones, and that goes with application types and then things like vendor interconnection. So banking clients typically have core providers that they have to connect to, and those core providers may not support cloud options in the way that they would like.
I think Eric touched on the compliance piece. There's several verticals, whether it be healthcare, financial, whatnot, that have certain stipulations that data may not leave the state of Kentucky, for example, which is where we reside. And that holds true for a lot of different states as well. And that could be one reason, right? It's got to stay within the state, therefore I can't go to the cloud. Or, and this is a question, this is something to consider for everybody watching. if you are wanting to go to the cloud and there is a stipulation that says the data must reside in this state, well, find a cloud provider in that state. They can tell you where the data will sit. If they can't tell you, and there are some instances out there to say, hey, you're going to be in this region. We don't know exactly which one you're going to be at, but you're going to be in this region. That may not be an option for that particular application. But a lot of times these cloud providers can tell you where the data will sit. And that's a big deal for some of the more compliant verticals out there.
Yeah, one more I wanted to add to, John, that we
Please.
can touch on around cost was we do have some organizations that prefer to have a fixed cost. So when they look at an on-prem solution and the cost of that over 5 years versus a, we talk about you pay for what you use, right? And Microsoft, Amazon, they're going to send you that bill for exactly what you used, and they don't really care that it was twice as much as your bill last month. And you have to be very careful about how you use those services so you don't end up with that way. And that we see that a lot from CFOs, that they don't want to have that possibility of an unexpected variable cost. And they would rather go with a 5-year depreciation cycle on hardware.
Well, I think it was you who mentioned it earlier. It's more of a financial conversation. It could have been Eric. But does your organization tend to do more OpEx or more CapEx? That's another reason for, and you mentioned the financial implications, is why people leave to go to the cloud. Sometimes people just want to get out of the buying hardware business. I don't want to have to buy any more servers. I don't want to have to buy any more storage. I just want a monthly figure, pay for what I use, and that's what it is. And maybe that fits the OpEx financial model, and it gives them an ability to scale both up and down, and be good stewards of the organization's money in that sense, right? But everything is different. But that is a big reason as to where I've seen people go to the cloud is, I don't want to have to buy hardware that I'm going to need 5 years from now, but I do it on day one. I think that methodology, whether you're doing it on premise or in the cloud, I would highly encourage organizations not to purchase something they're going to need 5 years from now. Get what you need 2 to 3 years from now and add additional capacity as you grow. Keep your money, right? Invest it in other things, and that's what we see typically. That's the legacy model, in my opinion. I think the current gen model is buy what you need now with some cushion and add capacity over time. And the same holds true with the cloud. You go in with some cushion, some buffer, but for the most part, the premise is pay for what you need. Here's a pool of resources. You got some room to expand a little bit if you need to, but I only want to pay for what I'm using today. And some organizations like that, but some organizations are strictly CapEx, or they touch on what you touched on, Shane, the security and trust aspect. I don't want my data elsewhere. I want it right down the hall in the data center where I can go see the blinky lights doing what they do and know that my data sits right there. And that's okay too. I mean, I don't think there's a right or a wrong. You can make compelling cases for both, but going through the process of prioritizing applications, understanding what's mission critical, and then if you do want to explore a cloud type of project, seeing what the options are per application, per workload, and that will help the organizations be as efficient and profitable as possible, in my opinion. Would you all agree with that statement?
Yeah, I was going to add one thing to that, if that's okay, John. Just on the note, because Shane brought up a good point about trust and security. Make no mistakes about it. When we talk about public cloud, I think we all get this mysterious, I know at least my wife does, because she's not as familiar with this. When she talked about public cloud originally, it was like, what is this mysterious public cloud? At the end of the day, it's still a data center somewhere, hosted by human beings. There could be issues. There are natural disasters. There are, SLAs that these different organizations sign up for. And so the number one thing I tell my customers is as you're moving data to the public cloud, make sure you also check on the SLAs, the T's and C's with the service that you are looking at. For example, a lot of the services within the public cloud are looking at 4 or 3 nines of availability. What that equates to is upwards of a day or 8 hours to a day worth of downtime that a customer is signing up for. You might not sign on a piece of paper. When you put that credit card in, you sign up can say, I'm okay if this service is unavailable for this amount of time every year. You know, that's why we're seeing huge articles come out every few months from CNN, MSNBC, and others saying, hey, huge AWS outage, all these customers were affected. Well, then you think to yourself, well, why didn't those big, large businesses, sue those companies for being down? Well, they signed up for that downtime. So just keep that into consideration when we're talking about where to put those applications at and the trust and the uptime that's expected from those applications.
And businesses asking themselves the question, what is my tolerance for downtime? We talked earlier about, more nines equals more dollar signs. If you can equate a day of downtime and understand what that is for your organization, a lot of organizations don't understand it fully. And you may go and explore a cloud solution, and when you see the result, you might take a step back and think, well, that's pretty expensive. Well, it can be less expensive if you've got more tolerance for downtime. And that's the question only an organization can answer, right? People are continuing to spend money on the cloud, and here's another fun fact: by 2023, over $600 billion will be spent on cloud services. It just blows me away. The cloud really it's not new, but it's not old either. I think mid 2000s, the cloud started. VMware threw out their abilities to do what they do and create that cloud environment. To Eric's point, cloud is nothing more than a physical environment sitting somewhere that you aren't managing, right? It's a virtual environment sitting in a data center somewhere. Sometimes an organization wants to have that flexibility of paying for only the resources they leverage, as well as see the blinky lights down the hall. And shameless plug for HPE, we came up with something called Hpe Green Lake, which allows us to provide hardware to clients, and they only have to pay for the resources they use, just like a cloud situation. And it has been extremely successful. Last quarter over the quarter before, there was 82% growth. So it's resonating. People want to manage their environment as they always had, but they only want to pay for the resources they use. So that seems to be resonating with the clients today, and it's pretty exciting. I get it, right? If I'm a business owner, I only want to pay for what I'm using and hang on to my money if I can, and work on other projects, do those types of things. Are you seeing a big need for that in the marketplace, Shane?
I don't typically see a lot of that in the SMB space at the size of the environments that we're working with. I can see it now that the bar for entry has kind of moved down. As you were mentioning to me a time before, that the piece that you have to start with is getting smaller. It used to be a fairly big iron that you had to start with, and now you can buy some much smaller pieces that have extra capacity that you can buy as you need it. So I do see that as, again, for those manufacturing clients, those clients that do have a necessary need for on-premises hardware, that could be a place where they would be looking at in the future.
Roger that. Well, to wrap up this conversation, guys, I know we're 35 minutes in. We got to take time for our Q&As and whatnot and our Kahoots. Based on the conversation we've had today, the misconceptions that are out there in regards to cloud versus on-prem. We talk about the cloud not being as inexpensive as one might think, and making sure to leverage the various variables out there to make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Are there any other misconceptions that we might have overlooked regarding cloud versus on-prem?
Yeah, I think a big one that's probably near and dear to a lot of people attending the webinar is this misconception that putting your stuff in the cloud allows you to get rid of your IT people. And I can tell you that that's absolutely not the case as someone who's tasked with keeping up with and learning about all of these different cloud services. In fact, I would say there's probably more to know and be aware of and keep track of than you would with an on-premise environment. Things like Microsoft Active Directory and file servers haven't really changed that much in the last 5 years or so, probably even longer than that. Some slight changes, but not very much. Even something like Microsoft Exchange email hasn't really changed all that much. But cloud services are changing all of the time. New features come up, new levels of service are available, new scripting packages to manage these things, the interface changes. I mean, it's just constantly changing. And you have to have people who are knowledgeable, whether that be a service provider or internal people who have the ability to keep up with those things. So yes, there are maybe some particular positions that could be eliminated. For instance, if you were to get rid of a physical data center, you wouldn't necessarily need the people who manage the facilities and the physical part of that, but you still need people who know how to run and manage it.
Very good point. And to add to that, having came from the data center cloud world, that was a concern for a lot of people. Hey, if we go this direction, am I eliminating my job? The reality is, no, your activities just change a little bit, right? You still have to do some things with that cloud application, or that application living in the cloud, and manage it as you always did. You just don't have to keep the room cold, or the security pieces for that particular data center. Eric, in conclusion, what are some of your thoughts, your takeaways?
Yeah, I would just say the biggest thing is to have a conversation, bring somebody from outside the organization, whether that be somebody, for example, here at HPE, somebody like Shane and the team at NetGain. They're fantastic, by the way, one of our best partners that we work with, and I work with about 24 different ones. But I just want to say that's the best thing I recommend to customers is bring somebody outside the organization in. Let's have a conversation. Let's bring together the different organizations and the lines of business leaders, because everybody has their own thoughts and opinions. And the number one issue I see is what we call cloud sprawl, where everybody has their own cloud environment. Each department has their own environment because everybody thinks it's easy. Shane pointed out the part where, you think you don't have to have as many resources to manage it, which is absolutely not true. But also, I would say that another misconception is the idea of it's going to be easy. It's the easy button. That is absolutely not true. It can be the easy button if we have the right mix and we have all of our organization on the same page. But that's the one thing I would say, just make sure we have those conversations, and also consider data mobility. Data, and especially data storage on premise within a private cloud, is not the same as a public cloud, and it makes it extremely difficult sometimes to move that data back and forth. That's where things like Hpe Green Lake and HPE's cloud volumes offerings come in very handy to keep that consistent block storage type of environment for a lot of the applications that we're all working with. But just keep that into consideration and make sure you really do a TCO analysis before we just go all in and say it's going to be cheaper one way or the other.
At the end of the day, I believe I think organizations will find themselves living in a hybrid world, hybrid being on-premise and cloud, and on-premise isn't going to die off and go away, in my opinion. You're always going to have people. There's always going to have application requirements that require it be on site or in a co-location facility for that particular customer. It's never going to go away. Thank goodness for me, right? I sell storage, so I kind of like that. But all that said, that happy medium, hybrid may morph into public cloud and private cloud, and letting them play together nicely. So hybrid can be a lot of different things, but we do encourage you to prioritize your applications and reconcile and see what would be good fits for the cloud, maybe, if you're interested. It could help the organization, and then again, it may not, but go through that exercise and understand what you have on site. That I think the organization will be better for it. We've got some Q&A going on right here. We've got the question panel. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. I know Eric and Shane are pretty good resources, and we got them for some time. So please feel free to ask any questions in the question panel. We'll hang out a little bit and let Miss Megan direct us on some questions. But we really appreciate everybody taking time today for the cloud versus on-premise conversation. Again, I'm John Bennet with HPE. We've got Shane Wendel with NetGain Technologies, as well as Eric Powers with HPE also. We appreciate you taking time over your lunch period today, hanging out with us. Hey, Megan, do I have any questions?
Hi. Yes, you do, actually. So while we go through this, what I would like to do is I'm going to throw up another polling question. It's a final polling question, and really it's just, how can we help you meet your goals? That's that's what's important here. We know everybody came to learn something new, and we hope that we covered some of that information. If not, like John said, put your questions in the question panel and we will get to it. So I'm going to throw up a how we can help. So feel free to answer that at your convenience and hit submit. And while those responses come in, we did get a very long question. So I'm gonna read it and then probably break it into a few pieces if that's okay with you all. So someone mentioned our biggest problem is deciding how or when to migrate data and the cost. What's a good way to plan for cutting over? We just got a couple of new hosts and some storage. So why and how do we determine what workloads to push to the cloud versus what to keep? And how do we justify moving to the cloud where we will start paying for services when we still haven't leveraged the equipment we have purchased? And of course, there are always things to keep. Yep.
Go ahead, Megan.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say,
and of
maybe
course,
you don't
there
have
are always things to keep on premise, like security, camera, storage, network monitoring. So I guess that you can go to the cloud since that's down your network. And access control. So there's still going to be some on-premise. We have to buy hardware. Where's the line, or how do we determine where that line is? So a little bit of a mouthful. Thank you so much, Philip, for that question. But we'll start with what's a good way to plan for cutting over. Eric, let me pass that one over to you, and then we'll go to you, Shane.
Yeah, I would say the first thing, guys, you don't have to be the expert at this. I want to say that having had this conversation today, this conversation was really an idea to give you some things to think about. But we're the experts here. We live and breathe this every day. We have the tools necessary to also go in and do cost analysis between the two. So I would say the first place for us to start at is to engage one of us, engage our team with HPE, engage the team with NetGain. Let's have the conversation around what's the right fit around how do we move the organization forward with the strategy defined. It goes back to that initial point that we talked about a few minutes ago, that we've really got to create a strategy before we can start moving things around. If we don't have that, we're just going to have this cloud sprawl. Doesn't make much sense. Everything's super siloed, which makes it hard to move and to see. So we want to make sure that we start at that point.
Shane, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just expanding on what Eric said, it absolutely starts with an assessment. There are multiple tools that can be used to determine all those little variables that decide how much moving that workload to the cloud is going to cost you. So if you're looking at a lift and shift, moving, the person particularly mentioned hosts, so I'm assuming they're talking about servers in particular. Moving those things to the cloud, we can run tools for that will run over a period of time and try to get the best fidelity and data and tell you how much that virtual machine is going to cost and to move into the cloud, how much data it's going to use, what your networking costs are going to be, what your backup costs are going to be, and things like that. So that's absolutely where it starts. If you have any kind of significant infrastructure, there are some very small environments that we've been able to do without that. But anything around 6 to 10 plus servers at least is somewhere where you really need to do an assessment and look at those things like bandwidth and all of those elements that you don't really have to think about when you're looking at your on-premises infrastructure.
And John, I think there was something that you wanted to add to that as well.
Hearing that scenario, and this is relating to the entire scenario, if you've got new hardware, maybe there's not a need to move to the cloud. I think it all drives down to what's the need. Ride that hardware for as long as you're supposed to have it, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, whatever your hardware refresh schedule is. Use it till you can't. And if you need additional capacity, I think that's the time when you begin to explore it. Hey, what does it look like if I need to add storage, if I need to add compute? Maybe this might be an opportunity to explore moving to the cloud. But if there's not a need, I don't encourage someone to just go to the cloud to go to the cloud. You guys spend a lot of money on this hardware. Use it for as long as you can, as it makes sense for the business. And at that point to where, hey, we need to add resources, or it becomes end of life, that's the opportunity, in my opinion, to go to the cloud. or maybe in a DR as a service type of fashion.
Yeah, I was going to add one thing to that, if it's okay, Megan, to that conversation really quick. If you already have hardware you just purchased, we do have the ability, if you're wanting to get a cloud experience, at least on premise as well, and get that cloud-like experience. We do have some functionalities with HP through our Green Lake services offerings, where we can actually, in certain cases, if it's HPE hardware, and then sometimes if it's not even HPE hardware, to buy that gear back, and we can actually do a consumption model with that gear. It just depends on what the hardware is, what vendors they are. But we can talk about that in a one-on-one conversation, but just something to think about. We can always deliver that service on premise, even after the fact in some cases.
Wonderful, thank you all. This one was less of a question, but more of a comment, and I'd actually like to get your all's thoughts on it. He said, great overview with respect to hidden costs, and any cloud decisions now has to be an application services based. We have a few years of VDI cloud that turned out to not be optimal, and moving forward, we will be a hybrid cloud on-premise final solution. Thanks. Shane, I'm going to flip it to you, and then you, Eric, and then we'll go to you, John. And as far as, is that a situation that you have seen often, not often? How can they prevent kind of that, back and forth and get the right solution off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, but it starts with doing your due diligence up front, and things like proof of concepts to make sure that the solution that you're looking to move to is actually going to meet your needs, and getting all of the stakeholders involved in that proof of concept, right? So if you're building a solution for a particular department of your organization, you want to make sure you have someone from that department involved in that proof of concept, to try to control for any missing pieces that you might not have thought of making that decision. Eric?
Anything?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say the number one thing I usually tell customers is that if you need an application and you want it in the public cloud, the better performance you need, and the more availability that you need of that service, especially if it's going to be running all the time, the more likely it is it's not going to be cost effective. You need to look at it, especially in terms of scaling. You need to look at it from the standpoint of, how long do I need this to run? When is it going to run? Who are my users? How often am I going to be transversing data in and out of that public cloud? Things to consider there. But again, we can have those conversations, and we're here to help, guys. You don't have to be the experts of this. That's what we live and breathe every day, so we can help in that regard. But just some things to think about there. And we also have services too between NetGain and HPE, where we can maybe give you that public cloud feel, or give you the public cloud for resources like compute resources, which are great. But maybe we take that storage and we put it cloud adjacent in something like, example, HPE Cloud Volumes, where we still keep it to where you can move it back and forth on premise into the public cloud very, very easy and without cost associated. So just some things to think about there, but we can have those conversations with each of you guys individually if you're interested.
I empathize with the customer there, because VDI, that's a tough one. You see the VDI as the service options out there, and there's a lot. There's some that do it well, but there's a lot that don't. And unfortunately, a lot of clients go down that path and have a bad experience, and it's a hard one. But that VDI as a service is an area that it's not an uncommon experience to have a poor one. Now, if you get to that point of having a lot of users and you want to make that experience better, maybe it's an opportunity for you to maybe build your own, or lease the hardware, or do it as a service, like Eric mentioned with HPE Green Lake. But we empathize with you. It's a tough one, and maybe the POC route is the way to go to help eliminate any challenges down the road and make sure it's a right solution out of the gate.
Perfect, thank you for that. But if you have any other questions on the topic, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at NetGain, and we can connect you with anybody over at HPE as well. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, John, for your insights. And thank you, everybody, for attending today's webinar, Cloud versus On-Premise. Learn what's right. Learn what's right for your organization. Enjoy the rest of your day.